on this, we're joined by Colin Harding, who's a Latin America analyst in Manchester in the UK. Welcome back to the programme, Colin. Now, Cuba needs 100,000 barrels a day just to function. And with Venezuela stepping back, can China or Russia realistically fill that void given the US sanctions?
The answer to that is no. I think nobody wants to challenge the Americans at the moment, and President Trump's threat to impose tariffs on anybody who sends oil to Cuba, so virtually none is getting in. The main supplier of oil to Cuba once Venezuela was off the scene was Mexico, and the Mexicans certainly don't want to provoke President Trump at the moment. So no, the Cubans are just having to improvise, as we've heard, with anything that doesn't use oil.
And with 1 in 5 Cubans reportedly having left the country, how does an economy survive a 20% workforce collapse on top of that energy crisis that we're seeing?
Well, the report from Cuba is saying that the daily life is virtually ground to a halt, that produce is not getting to the markets, schools and universities closing. There's a 4-day week in such factories and jobs that are functioning. The situation is extremely difficult. There's a humanitarian crisis growing, which President Trump is very well aware of, and he thinks that increasing pressure of this sort will force the Cuban government, to come to some kind of deal. As he said, they must make a deal before it's too late.
Now, those vintage 1950s cars that we just saw are a massive tourism draw. If they're grounded, does Cuba risk losing its most vital source of foreign hard currency?
Well, tourism has actually stopped as it is. The main problem there, as we've heard, is there's no transport, so people can't get around. Everybody's very uncertain about the situation, and there's no aviation fuel, so you can arrive in Cuba, but the planes can't refuel, so you're stranded there. And the Canadians, who provide a lot of the tourists to Cuba, have stopped flying to Cuba because they can't refuel when they get there. So the tourism has virtually stopped, and governments are warning their citizens, don't go to Cuba because you'll be stranded.
And now with the government cutting the working week and rationing fuel, are we looking at hyperinflation turning into a total breakdown of the domestic supply chain?
Well, the Americans don't want a total breakdown. I think they imagine that increasing pressure of this sort will force somebody in the Cuban government to negotiate. And President Trump says that that Americans, and including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, are talking to the Cubans at the moment. It's not clear who in the Cuban government. It's a collective leadership. It's not like Venezuela. But they think that they might be able to identify somebody who'd be prepared to come to a deal. And the name of General Alejandro Castro Espin has been mentioned here. He's Fidel Castro's nephew. He's the son of Raul Castro, who was president until a few years ago and still a very influential figure in retirement. And General Castro Espin has been involved in talks with the Americans in the past, and he's thought to be a figure they might be able to do business with, but he can't himself change things. It's not like Venezuela at all. It's a very different sort of country, and they're well used to riding out pressures, and they're not going to talk about abandoning communism or anything like that. So what the Americans might be trying to achieve is some kind of economic opening, but we'll have to see how that goes.
Right, we'll have to leave it there for now. Colin Harding in Manchester, thank you very much for your analysis.